Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You guys know we love getting into the nitty-gritty of relationships.
You do?
And this one is no exception.
Hmm.
We've got a ton of questions about borderline personality disorder, BPD,
Yeah.
and how it shows up in relationships.
Take one.
Huge topic. So let's just get right into it.
Yeah, let's do
You
it.
hear about this whole push and pull thing.
Right.
What is that all about?
Well, to really understand it, we got to lay some groundwork first. BPD is right.
Right. So it's like this whole, mental health diagnosis. But how does that tie in with, like, attachment and all that stuff we hear about?
It ties in directly. That's the thing. Our early childhood experiences, especially with our caregivers, they kind of shape our attachment styles later in life.
Okay.
And there are two insecure attachment styles that often pop up when we talk about BPD.
Yeah.
Anxious attachment and disorganized attachment.
So let's break those down. What's going on with anxious attachment?
So picture this. You're growing up and your caregiver is unpredictable.
Okay.
Sometimes they're super loving, attentive there for you.
Right.
And then other times they're just emotionally unavailable, maybe even neglectful.
Wow.
That inconsistency creates a powerful fear of abandonment in a child.
Makes sense.
And now fast forward, they're an adult carrying that fear with them into their relationships.
Okay.
So they might need constant reassurance from their partner and worry about any little sign of rejection.
Oh, wow.
Even something small like a delayed text message can be a trigger.
Because to them, it's not just a delayed text message. It's like, oh my God, they're leaving me?
Exactly. They're reliving that early childhood fear.
Wow, that's so powerful. And then what about disorganized attachment? What's that one all about?
This one's often linked to early experiences of trauma or really unstable situations during childhood.
So like real serious stuff.
Yeah, and it's this mix of really wanting closeness and intimacy,
Right.
but also having a deep fear of vulnerability and getting hurt.
It's almost like they want it, but they're terrified at the same time.
You hit the nail on the head. It's like this internal tug of war, and that can create a lot of turmoil in their relationships.
Yeah.
Because remember that fear of abandonment we talked about? It's central to BPD, and it's amplified in both of these attachment styles.
So it's like understanding these attachment styles is like a key to unlocking all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
It helps make sense of behaviors that might otherwise seem baffling or even hurtful.
Right. You start to see that these are responses to deep-seated fears, not just personality flaws.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about like what BPD is and how it's connected to these attachment styles. But for our listeners out there, why does this even matter?
It matters because it helps us understand the emotional experience of both partners in these relationships.
So both partners, yeah. Our sources keep talking about this thing called emotional dysregulation. What does that even mean, like in real world terms?
So you know how most people feel emotions at like a normal level?
Yeah.
Imagine feeling their same emotions but like 10 times stronger.
Whoa.
That's what it can be like for someone with BPD.
Intense.
Yeah. Love, joy, anger, sadness, it's all amplified, and they can switch between these emotions really quickly.
Like a roller coaster.
Exactly. 1 minute they might feel super connected and loved, and then the next minute, bam, something small happens, like a perceived slight, or maybe plans change, or even like a text message that seems off.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly they're spiraling, feeling worthless or afraid or angry.
It's like their emotions are controlling them instead of the other way around.
It's more common than you think. Actually, we got a listener question about emotional flooding.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, they're curious about what that means.
So imagine this. Your partner forgets to pick up your dry cleaning.
Okay.
And suddenly you're hit with this wave of emotion like a tsunami. You feel abandoned.
Yeah.
You start questioning their love and commitment.
Oh, no.
In that moment, it feels impossible to think clearly or rationally.
Because you're just so overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's important to remember, though, that their actions, even when they're hurtful, they're often driven by this fear of abandonment, this desperate need to protect themselves from that pain.
So it's like a defense mechanism almost.
In a way, yeah. It's not about excusing the behavior, but understanding where it's coming from.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do partners deal with this? How do you handle being on the receiving end of all that intensity?
It's definitely not easy. Partners often say it feels like walking on eggshells.
Because you never know what's going to set them off.
Right, and so they might start avoiding certain topics or holding back their own feelings just to keep the peace.
That sounds exhausting.
It can be incredibly draining. And over time, it can create resentment and distance if they're not careful.
Because you're not really being your true self in the relationship.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that both partners are going through it.
Right.
The person with BPD is dealing with these intense emotions, but their partner is trying to navigate them while also taking care of their own needs.
Which is a really tough balancing act.
It is. It can feel like you're constantly being pulled in opposite directions, wanting to be supportive, but also needing to protect yourself.
So where do you go from there? Is there even hope for these relationships? So is there hope? I mean, it sounds like a lot, right?
It is a lot, but there's always hope. Knowledge is power, right?
Right.
When we understand what's really going on, we can start to make conscious choices instead of just reacting based on those old patterns.
Okay, so what are those choices? Our sources talk about some strategies for building stronger connections, even when BPD is part of the equation.
For sure, and one of the biggest ones.
It's a mutation.
Okay, but we can't just say communicate more and expect that to magically fix everything.
Definitely not. It's about communicating differently.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, one thing our sources suggest is using I statements. So instead of saying, "you're always so clingy," which can feel like an attack,
Yeah.
you could say, "I feel overwhelmed and a bit suffocated when I don't get any time to myself."
Oh, that's interesting. Because it's not blaming the other person, it's just stating your own experience.
Exactly. And for the person with BPD, learning to express their fears in a vulnerable way can actually be really healing for the relationship.
So it's like a two-way street. Both partners are working on communicating more effectively.
Absolutely. Communication is huge. But there's another tool that's really helpful for couples dealing with BPD.
What's that?
Learning to recognize triggers.
Triggers like what sets them off.
Yeah, exactly. For the person with BPD, it's about noticing those early warning signs that things are escalating.
So like what? Their heart starts racing, they get fidgety.
It could be physical sensations like that, or even just certain thoughts or feelings that start popping up. And for the partner, it's about recognizing those triggers too, so they can approach the situation with more understanding.
That makes sense. Because if you know what tends to send your partner into a spiral, you can be more mindful about how you approach those conversations.
Right. You can be more patient, more supportive. One source even suggested keeping a shared journal to track emotions and reactions.
Interesting. Like a couple's journal.
Exactly. It might sound cheesy, but it can be a really powerful way to gain insight into those patterns together without judgment.
I like that. Okay, so we've got communication, we've got recognizing triggers. What about self-care? What does that fit in?
Self-care is huge, and it might seem counterintuitive, but encouraging independence within the relationship is actually really important for both partners.
Wait, really? You're saying that to build a stronger connection, you need to spend time apart?
In a way, yeah. It's about both partners having their own identities, interests, and support systems outside of the relationship.
So it's not about losing yourself and trying to fix the other person.
Exactly. It's about remembering that you are two whole individuals who choose to be together.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you're both showing up as your best selves, which ultimately benefits the relationship.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off of the relationship to meet all of your needs.
This has been so insightful. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but we've covered so much ground today, from the roots of BPD and attachment theory to those intense emotional experiences to practical tools for building stronger connections.
And if there's one thing I want listeners to take away from this, it's that understanding BPD and its impact on relationships is a journey. It's not about achieving some perfect state of harmony.
It's about learning and growing together.
Exactly. It's about showing up with curiosity and compassion, both for yourself and your partner.
And remembering that you're not alone. There are resources available, people who understand and support out there for both partners.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.